The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chambers stretched high above the assembled delegates, its walls shimmering with the light of 1,000 distant stars. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated sections, their various forms creating a bizarre tapestry of galactic civilization. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert the cacophony of alien languages into something resembling coherent discussion. Admiral Kai Sung stood at the central podium, his dark uniform crisp despite the long journey from Earth. The holographic projector before him displayed technical schematics that seemed to bend and twist in impossible ways, showing a vessel that looked more like crystallized space than any conventional starship. The assembled aliens leaned forward in their seats, some with multiple eyes widening in disbelief, others chittering or growling in their native tongues. The Prometheus-class vessel, Ki-sung continued, his voice steady despite the growing murmur of skepticism, was designed using principles that your current understanding of physics might find challenging. Phase manipulation allows the ship to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously, while temporal distortion fields can create localized time loops for tactical advantage. A series of harsh barks erupted from the Keth Mori section. Their ambassador, a creature resembling a bipedal wolf with cybernetic implants covering half its skull, stood up abruptly. Impossible! Our scientists have studied dimensional physics for millennia. Such technology would require energy output, equivalent to a small star. Indeed, rumbled Council Prime Drakmor from his elevated throne. The massive reptilian being's scales shifted from deep green to amber, a sign of amusement among his species. His forearms gestured dismissively at the hologram. Phase manipulation technology, temporal distortion fields, these humans expect us to believe such fantasies. Your species has been part of this galactic community for less than 50 cycles. We have civilizations here that mastered faster than light travel when your ancestors were still throwing rocks at each other. The chamber erupted in what could generously be called laughter, though it sounded more like a collection of screeches, roars, and electronic static. The Vexuri delegates, tall, ethereal beings made of living energy, pulsed with colors that their translation devices interpreted as mocking amusement. The insectoid Zixthak clicked their mandibles in what their species considered the equivalent of hysterical laughter. Captain Minho sat silently in the human delegation section, his weathered face betraying nothing. His cybernetic eye, a souvenir from the border wars, recorded everything while his organic eye studied the faces around him. Beside him, Communications Officer Hei Jin shifted uncomfortably as the alien laughter continued. "Sir, should we respond?" she whispered. Minho raised a hand slightly, a gesture so small that only his human companions noticed. He had been through this before. Humanity had always been the underdog in galactic politics, arriving late to a party where the other guests had been socializing for thousands of years. Every technological advancement, every cultural achievement, every military victory was dismissed as either luck or primitive brutality. Admiral Vextar, whose species bore an unfortunate resemblance to an octopus crossed with a tank, extended several tentacles toward the human delegation. His voice carried the universal tone of condescension that transcended species barriers. "Your laser cannons and kinetic weapons are quaint, like watching children play with toy soldiers. Leave this war to species with actual technology." The mention of war caused the chamber's atmosphere to shift dramatically. The Void Swarm had emerged from the dark spaces between galaxies just 3 months ago, their biomechanical vessels consuming entire star systems before moving on to their next target. They didn't communicate, didn't negotiate, didn't show mercy. They simply devoured everything in their path and grew stronger. The first contact had been with the outer rim mining colonies of the Taldarian Empire. The distress signals had lasted exactly 17 minutes before cutting off permanently. When the Council's investigation fleet arrived, they found nothing but empty space where 3 planets had once orbited their star. Not destroyed, consumed as if they had never existed at all. "The swarm vessels appear to be living ships," Admiral Vextar continued, his tentacles weaving through the air as he accessed his personal data files. They adapt to our weapon systems within minutes of first contact. Plasma cannons become ineffective after the third salvo. Ion torpedoes lose potency after the fifth engagement. They learn, they evolve, they overcome. Which is precisely why we need every available resource, Ki-sung interjected, his voice cutting through the growing tension. Humanity may be new to this council, but we've been fighting wars since before we could walk upright. We understand adaptation, evolution, survival. The Keth Mori ambassador's cybernetic implants whirred as he accessed combat records. Your species' military achievements are limited. Planetary conflicts using chemical propellants and explosive devices. The border skirmish with the Altarian pirates lasted 3 days and required intervention from Vexuri peacekeepers. Because we followed galactic law, Minho finally spoke, his voice carrying across the chamber despite its quiet tone. We used approved weapon systems, followed engagement protocols, respected territorial boundaries. But the Void Swarm doesn't follow galactic law, does it? The chamber fell silent. Even the ambient hum of translation devices seemed to quiet, as the implications of his words sank in. What exactly are you suggesting? Council Prime Drakmor's scales shifted to a deeper amber, bordering on red. Minho stood slowly, his movements deliberate and measured. I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to stop playing by rules that our enemy doesn't acknowledge. Humanity has resources that we've kept in reserve, assets that we've never deployed because they violate 17 different galactic treaties. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, the Vexuri energy beings pulsed with what their translators interpreted as curiosity mixed with alarm. As the Council moved to vote on humanity's exclusion from the defensive fleet, Minho activated a small device hidden in his sleeve. The quantum transmitter sent a simple coded message across the galaxy, reaching Earth in less than a second. Prepare the Ghost Protocol. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would have no official role in the galaxy's defense against the Void Swarm. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, discussing fleet compositions and battle strategies, none of them noticed the slight smile that played across Captain Minho's lips. Some legends, he reflected, were about to become very real indeed. The emergency alarms hadn't stopped screaming for 72 hours straight. The Galactic Council chambers, once a symbol of unity and order, now resembled a war room filled with panicked voices and flickering holographic displays showing nothing but red zones across the galaxy map. The smell of fear hung heavy in the recycled air as delegates huddled around tactical displays, watching their civilizations crumble in real time. Admiral Vextar's tentacles trembled as he manipulated the central hologram, zooming in on what remained of the Kepler defense grid. Where once stood the galaxy's most heavily fortified military installation, now only debris fields drifted in empty space. The Nexus Prime shipyards are gone, he announced, his voice hollow. 200 vessels under construction, 15,000 workers, the entire infrastructure, consumed in less than 6 hours. The biomechanical monstrosities that comprised the Void Swarm defied every tactical manual ever written. Their ships looked like living creatures crossed with mechanical nightmares, pulsing organic hulls covered in metallic growths that shifted and adapted with each encounter. They didn't just destroy enemy vessels, they absorbed them, incorporating their technology and crew into their ever-growing mass. Council Prime Drakmor's massive form hunched over his command throne, his scales having shifted from their usual green to a sick grey color. His forearms gestured frantically at multiple displays simultaneously. "Status report from the 7th Fleet." "Gone, sir," came the reply from a junior Kethemori officer, his cybernetic implants sparking from overuse. Admiral Zekthor's flagship lasted 14 minutes against their lead vessel. The swarm ship. It learned to counter our plasma shields after the 3rd exchange. By the 6th, it was using our own weapon frequencies against us. The tactical displays showed the horrifying truth. Each engagement with the Void Swarm followed the same pattern. Initial contact would seem promising. Galactic forces would score hits, damage enemy vessels, even occasionally destroy smaller swarm ships. But within minutes, the enemy would adapt. Their biomechanical hulls would shift, developing new armor configurations. Their weapons would evolve, learning to bypass shields and exploit weaknesses. And worst of all, they would grow stronger by consuming the wreckage of defeated enemies. A piercing shriek filled the chamber as the emergency communicator activated. The holographic image of Commander Yixtal appeared, her insectoid features distorted by static, and what looked suspiciously like burn damage. "Council Prime, the swarm has breached the Andorian line. They're heading straight for the core systems." "How many ships?" Drakmor demanded. We can't count them anymore, sir. They've merged into some kind of megastructure. It's the size of a small moon, and it's eating everything in its path. Stars, planets, space stations. Nothing stops." The transmission cut to static, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. That's when Ambassador So Young entered the chamber. Unlike the frantic energy surrounding her, she moved with calm purpose, her black diplomatic uniform pristine despite the chaos. Her eyes, enhanced with subtle cybernetic implants that most species couldn't detect, swept across the assembled delegates with the calculating gaze of someone who had seen this scenario before. "We warned you this would happen," she said, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of panic. Every translation device in the chamber instantly focused on her, words broadcasting them in 47 different languages simultaneously. "The swarm cannot be fought with conventional weapons. They adapt too quickly, learn too fast, evolve beyond anything you can throw at them." The Vexuri energy beings pulsed with colors that their translators interpreted as frustration and anger. "Your species offers criticism but no solutions. Where are your mighty human fleets, your legendary tactical genius?" So Young smiled, and somehow that expression was more unsettling than all the panic around her. "Our fleets are exactly where we said they would be, waiting." Council Prime Drakmor's voice cracked with desperation, his usual composed demeanor completely shattered. "And what would you have us do? Our combined fleet, 7,000 vessels, the finest ships ever built, they're being systematically destroyed. Should we pray to your mythical ghost ship, beg your imaginary superweapons to save us?" "Not pray," So Young replied, reaching into her diplomatic pouch. "Authorize." She placed a small crystalline device on the podium. The object was barely larger than her palm, its surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move when viewed directly. The crystal pulsed with an inner light that didn't match any known technology in the galactic database. Several delegates leaned forward, their various sensory organs trying to analyze the mysterious device. "This is a quantum communicator," So Young explained, her finger hovering over a small depression in the crystal's surface. "One signal from this device, and humanity will deploy our final defensive asset. But I warn you, once we begin, there's no going back. Some powers were meant to remain hidden for very good reasons." The chamber erupted in desperate chatter. The Kethamori delegates howled among themselves in their native language, while the Zixthak clicked their mandibles in rapid-fire discussion. The Taldarian representative, his crystalline body structure resonating with harmonic frequencies of distress, demanded to know more about this mysterious human technology. "What kind of asset?" Admiral Vextar asked, his tentacles wrapping around his command console. "Another fleet? Experimental weapons? Planet-killer missiles?" So Young's expression remained neutral. "Something older, something we built when we first realized we weren't alone in the universe. Something designed specifically for threats that conventional warfare cannot handle." Another alarm screamed across the chamber as fresh reports flooded in. The Void Swarm had consumed the Rigel Mining Consortium in its entirety, 7 planets, 12 moons, and nearly 1 billion inhabitants. The megastructure was growing larger, its biomechanical tendrils reaching out to consume asteroid fields and gas giants with equal efficiency. "They're heading for Proxima Central," announced a terrified technician. If they reached the galactic trade hub, the implications hung heavy in the air. Proxima Central wasn't just a commercial center, it was the nexus of galactic civilization, home to nearly 50 billion beings from hundreds of different species. Its fall would mark the effective end of organized resistance. Council Prime Drakmor looked around the chamber, at the faces of his fellow delegates. Some were paralyzed by fear, others calculating escape routes, but all of them understood the reality of their situation. Traditional tactics had failed. Their most advanced weapons were useless. Their greatest military minds had been outthought by an enemy that learned faster than they could adapt. What are the risks? He finally asked. So Young's finger pressed closer to the crystal's surface. Unknown. This technology has never been deployed in actual combat. We built it, tested it in controlled environments, then sealed it away because we weren't sure the galaxy was ready for what it represented. As if summoned by her words, another distress signal crackled through the chamber's communication systems. This time, it was from the Outer Rim Defense Platform, humanity's own contribution to galactic security. The platform's commander, Captain Dong Su, appeared on screen, with emergency lighting casting harsh shadows across his face. Council Prime, the swarm has detected our position. They're adapting to our defensive systems faster than we can reconfigure. We have maybe 20 minutes before they break through. The chamber fell silent except for the steady pulse of the quantum communicator in So Young's hands. The authorization, she said quietly. We need it now. Council Prime Drakmor looked around one final time at the assembled delegates. 47 species, thousands of years of civilization, countless worlds and trillions of lives, all hanging in the balance. His scales shifted one last time, from grey to a deep, decisive blue. Granted, he whispered. So Young pressed the crystal. The device flared with brilliant light, and somewhere in the depths of space, ancient machinery began to wake. 300 meters beneath the lunar surface, in a chamber that officially didn't exist, emergency lighting bathed ancient corridors in blood-red shadows. The quantum communicator's signal had traveled faster than light itself, activating systems that had been dormant since humanity's first contact with alien civilization. Deep within the moon's core, something that had been sleeping for centuries began to stir. Captain Junseo moved through the facility's main corridor with practiced ease, his enhanced reflexes automatically adjusting to the low-gravity environment. His cybernetic implants, far more advanced than anything the Galactic Council had ever seen, interfaced seamlessly with the facility's awakening systems. Behind him, 19 other figures followed in perfect synchronization. The Ghost Protocol, Team, humanity's most closely guarded secret. The facility itself defied conventional engineering. Corridors carved from solid rock, intersected with chambers that seemed to exist in folded space, their dimensions larger on the inside than their external measurements should allow. Walls lined with crystalline matrices pulsed with energy patterns that existed partially outside normal physics, their glow casting impossible shadows that bent in directions that shouldn't exist. "Sir, the quantum resonance chambers are coming online," reported Lieutenant Heejin, her neural implants glowing softly beneath her skin. Unlike the crude cybernetics used by other species, human enhancement technology had evolved along paths that the galaxy's other civilizations couldn't comprehend. Core temperature is rising to operational parameters. Junseo nodded, feeling the familiar tingle in his enhanced nervous system as the facility's exotic fields began to interact with his implants. Every member of the Ghost Protocol team had undergone modifications that pushed the boundaries of what it meant to be human. Their brains had been rewired to process information in quantum states, their reflexes enhanced to react to events that hadn't technically happened yet. Their consciousness expanded to perceive dimensions that normal minds couldn't grasp. The central chamber stretched before them like a cathedral dedicated to technologies that violated natural law. At its heart sat the central dais, a circular platform surrounded by rings of crystalline projectors that hummed with barely contained energy. The air itself seemed to shimmer and bend, creating visual distortions that made depth perception impossible. Beginning. Materialization sequence, announced Chief Engineer Wu Jin, his hands dancing across control interfaces that responded to thought as much as touch. Dimensional anchor points are stable. Quantum field generators are at full power. The space above the dais began to ripple like water, disturbed by an invisible stone. Reality seemed to tear and fold as something vast pushed its way through from wherever it had been waiting. The Prometheus didn't so much appear as unfold into existence, its hull materializing section by section as dimensional barriers dissolved. The ship was beautiful in the way that natural disasters were beautiful, awe-inspiring and terrifying in equal measure. Its hull appeared to be constructed from crystallized space-time itself, its surface flowing like liquid mercury, while simultaneously maintaining the rigid structure necessary for spaceflight. The metal, if it could be called metal, shifted between states of matter, sometimes solid, sometimes gaseous, occasionally becoming translucent enough to see through to the chamber's rock walls beyond. "She's magnificent," whispered Navigator Eugene, her enhanced eyes tracking energy patterns that danced across the ship's hull. 3 centuries in dimensional storage, and she's still perfect. The Prometheus measured nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, but its exact dimensions seemed to shift depending on the angle of observation. Weapon arrays that looked like organic growths sprouted from its hull, their barrels twisting through dimensions that allowed them to fire in directions that defied geometry. The ship's bridge was visible through sections of translucent hull, a sphere of pure energy suspended within the vessel's heart. "All crew aboard," Junseo ordered, his voice carrying across the chamber through both normal acoustics and quantum transmission fields. His team moved with inhuman precision, their enhanced bodies adapting instantly to the ship's exotic internal environment. The interior of the Prometheus was even more disorienting than its exterior. Corridors that should have been straight curved through folded space, connecting rooms that existed in different dimensional states. The bridge itself defied physics, a spherical chamber where crew members could stand on any surface, gravity adjusting automatically to accommodate their position. "Captain on deck," announced Tactical Officer Tae-hyun, though in the bridge's altered geometry, the concepts of deck and overhead had little meaning. His weapon systems interfaced directly with his enhanced nervous system, allowing him to target enemies through probability calculations rather than traditional aiming. Lieutenant Hai-jin settled into the navigator's position, her consciousness expanding as she linked with the ship's dimensional sensors. "Sir, I'm reading massive quantum distortions throughout the system. The Void Swarm's presence is destabilizing local spacetime." "Expected," Junseo replied, taking his position at the command nexus. As his enhanced mind merged with the ship's consciousness, he felt the Prometheus respond like a living creature, recognizing its master. They're not from this reality. Their presence creates ripples in the quantum foam. The dimensional engines came online with a sound that wasn't quite sound, a harmonic resonance that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions. That had no names. The ship's hull began to phase, its solid matter becoming increasingly translucent as it prepared to slip between the cracks of reality. "Captain, the quantum field generators are stable," Hyojin reported, her voice taking on an otherworldly quality, as the ship's exotic fields affected even enhanced human vocal cords. "Dimensional phase variance is within acceptable parameters. We're ready to phase." Through the bridge's translucent walls, they could see the lunar rock beginning to part around them. The Prometheus wasn't breaking through the moon's surface. It was convincing reality that the rock had never been there in the first place. Solid matter became as insubstantial as mist, as the ship rose through 300 meters of stone and metal without disturbing so much as a grain of dust. "Emergence in 30 seconds, announced Communications Officer So-jin, her implants interfacing with quantum communication systems that could transmit messages backwards through time. "The Galactic Council fleet is requesting our status." Junseo smiled grimly as the Prometheus broke free of Luna's surface, its hull solidifying as it entered the vacuum of space. In the distance, the lights of Earth's orbital defense platforms glittered like stars, while beyond them, the red glow of approaching void swarm vessels painted the cosmic darkness with the promise of destruction. The ship's weapon systems powered up, their exotic energy signatures invisible to conventional sensors but blindingly obvious to enhanced human perception. Temporal displacement drives spun up to operational speed, preparing to create multiple versions of the ship across different probability streams. Phase manipulation arrays charged with enough energy to convince matter that it didn't exist. Junseo opened a channel to the beleaguered Galactic Defense Fleet, his voice carrying across space through communication methods that the other species couldn't begin to understand. The message was simple: delivered in the calm tone of someone who had been preparing for this moment for 3 centuries. "This is Ghost Actual. We're coming." In the distance, space itself began to ripple as the Prometheus prepared to do things that the universe's rulebook said were impossible. The Void Swarm was about to learn that humanity had been writing their own rules for a very long time. The remnants of the Galactic Defense Fleet hung in space like broken toys, their hulls torn open and bleeding atmosphere into the void. Kepler Station, once the crown jewel of the Outer Rim, was nothing more than twisted metal and emergency lights flickering in the darkness. The Void Swarm had surrounded it completely, their biomechanical ships pulsing with absorbed energy from a dozen destroyed vessels. Admiral Vextar's flagship, the Majestic Dawn, limped through the debris field with half its engines dead and most of its weapon systems offline. "All remaining ships fall back to minimum safe distance," he ordered, his tentacles wrapped tightly around his command console. "We cannot engage. Repeat, we cannot engage." The swarm vessels were unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. Each ship looked like a nightmare fusion of living tissue and mechanical components, their hulls constantly shifting and adapting. What had started as 23 separate bioships had begun merging into larger constructs, their combined mass growing stronger with each absorbed enemy vessel. The largest swarm construct had consumed the station's defensive platforms and was now feeding on the station itself, its organic tendrils tearing through bulkheads like they were paper. The screams of trapped civilians echoed across emergency frequencies, while thousands of escape pods drifted helplessly in space, their occupants watching their home being devoured alive. "Sir, energy readings from the primary construct are off." "The charts," reported Commander Yixtal from her damaged bridge. "It's not just growing larger, it's becoming more complex. I'm detecting what looks like distributed intelligence networks forming within its structure." That's when space itself began to shimmer. The distortion started as a barely visible ripple, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. But this ripple bent light and twisted reality, creating visual effects that made seasoned spacers question their sanity. Stars seemed to stretch and compress, distant nebulae appeared to fold in on themselves, and the cosmic background radiation flickered like a dying light bulb. "What in the void is that?" Admiral Vextar demanded, his species-enhanced vision detecting dimensional anomalies that other races couldn't perceive. The answer came without warning. The Prometheus materialized directly inside the swarm formation, its crystalline hull solidifying, from translucent mist into devastating reality. The ship's appearance was impossible. It seemed to emerge from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, its hull phasing through 3 different swarm vessels as it took position at the heart of their formation. "This is Ghost Actual," came Captain Junseo's voice across all frequencies. "Beginning engagement." The Prometheus opened fire before the Void Swarm could react. But these weren't conventional weapons. Energy beams that existed in multiple dimensions struck swarm vessels from angles that shouldn't exist, hitting them from above, below, and through dimensions that had no names. The biomechanical hulls, designed to adapt to energy signatures, found themselves trying to evolve defenses against attacks that violated the fundamental laws of physics. The first swarm ship to be hit simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, not vaporized. It was convinced by exotic physics that it had never been there in the first place. Reality rewrote itself around the space it had occupied, and the universe smoothly filled in the gap as if the vessel had been erased from history. "Impossible," whispered the Kethmori weapons officer aboard Admiral Vextar's ship. "Energy cannot behave that way. Matter cannot simply disappear." But the Prometheus was just getting started. Ensign Taehyun's enhanced nervous system processed tactical data at superhuman speeds. His consciousness merged with the ship's exotic targeting systems. "Captain, their ships are adapting to our energy signatures. The biomechanical hulls are shifting to compensate for our weapon frequencies." "Then we adapt faster," Junseo replied, his voice carrying the calm confidence of someone who had trained. For this moment his entire life, he activated the temporal displacement system. Reality fractured around the Prometheus like a mirror hit by a hammer. Suddenly, 5 identical copies of the ship existed simultaneously, each one occupying a slightly different timeline. The effect was visually stunning and terrifying, the same vessel firing from 5 different positions at once, its weapons striking from past, present, and future simultaneously. The Void Swarm's bioships, designed to learn and adapt from enemy attacks, found themselves facing an impossible challenge. How do you evolve defenses against attacks that technically hadn't happened yet? How do you adapt to weapons fired from timelines that existed only in probability space? The result was devastating. Each temporal copy of the Prometheus fired independently, their exotic weapons creating cascading effects that multiplied exponentially. Swarm vessels that began adapting to attacks from Timeline Alpha found themselves blindsided by weapons from Timeline Beta, while their attempts to counter Timeline Beta left them vulnerable to Timeline Gamma. "Sweet, merciful void," breathed Commander Yixtel as her sensors tried to make sense of what they were detecting. They're not just fighting in 3 dimensions, they're fighting across multiple timelines simultaneously. Navigator Eugene enhanced consciousness spread across the Prometheus's dimensional sensors, monitoring the battle's effects on local space-time. What she detected made her neural implants spark with alarm. "Sir, local space-time is destabilizing. We're creating paradox cascades. The quantum foam is starting to fray." Around them, reality began to show signs of stress. Stars flickered between different colors as their light was bent through temporal distortions. Debris from destroyed swarm vessels aged decades in seconds, then reversed back to pristine condition, trapped in temporal loops that couldn't resolve themselves. But Junseo pressed the attack. The Prometheus phased through the largest swarm construct, its hull becoming intangible just long enough to pass through the enemy vessel's biomechanical armor. Once inside, the ship's exotic weapons fired at point-blank range, converting the construct's absorbed energy back into pure destructive force. The effect was spectacular. The massive bioship, which had been feeding on destroyed galactic vessels, for hours suddenly found all that absorbed energy turned inside out. Instead of strengthening the creature, the converted energy tore it apart from within, creating a chain reaction that spread to the other swarm vessels still connected to its distributed consciousness. "By the ancestors," Admiral Vextar gasped, as his instruments registered energy readings that broke his species' understanding of physics. "They're not just destroying the swarm ships, they're turning the creature's own adaptations against them." The tide of battle turned in minutes. Swarm vessels that had seemed invincible suddenly found themselves outmatched by an enemy that fought with weapons pulled from science fiction nightmares. The Prometheus moved through the enemy formation like a ghost, phasing in and out of solid matter, striking from impossible angles, existing in multiple timelines simultaneously. But the cost was becoming apparent. Space itself was beginning to buckle under the strain of so much exotic physics being used in one location. Gravitational waves rippled outward from the battle zone, affecting the orbits of nearby planets. Time moved at different rates in different areas of the battlefield, creating zones where seconds stretched into hours and hours compressed into heartbeats. "Captain," Eugene called out, her voice strained as she processed impossible amounts of dimensional data. "We're approaching the I threshold. If we push much harder, we risk creating a permanent rift in space-time." Junseo looked at the tactical display, watching as the remaining swarm vessels began to retreat into dark space. The battle was won, but at a cost that would be felt across the galaxy. The alien fleets that had witnessed the Prometheus in action would never again look at humanity the same way. "All stations begin power-down sequence," he ordered. "We've made our point." As the Prometheus began to fade back into dimensional phase, Admiral Vextar transmitted a message to the human vessel. "Ghost Actual, this is Admiral Vextar." That was unprecedented. But at what cost? Junseo's reply was simple and carried across space with the weight of prophecy. "Admiral, some victories are worth any price. Others are worth questioning whether we should have won at all." The Prometheus vanished, leaving behind a battlefield where the laws of physics would never quite work the same way again. The victory over the Void Swarm's main force should have been a moment of celebration, but instead, alarms were screaming across every ship in the galaxy. Reality itself was coming apart at the seams. and the Prometheus sat at the center of a growing catastrophe that threatened to consume everything they had fought to protect. Captain Junseo stood on his bridge as waves of temporal distortion rippled outward from their position. Through the ship's translucent hull, he could see space behaving in ways that defied every natural law. Nearby asteroids aged millions of years in seconds, crumbling to cosmic dust before reversing back to their original state. A small moon orbiting the gas giant Xerion flickered between existence and void, caught in a temporal loop that couldn't resolve itself. "Sir, the quantum cascade is expanding," Navigator Yujin reported, her enhanced consciousness struggling to process the impossible data flooding her neural implants. "We're detecting reality fractures spreading at near light speed. The Rigel system just experienced a temporal reversion. 3 planets have reverted to their state from 1,000 years ago. The worst part was that it was working. The remaining void swarm vessels, those nightmare biomechanical constructs that had consumed entire star systems, were being torn apart by the same forces that threatened the galaxy. Their adaptive hulls couldn't evolve defenses against attacks from weapons that existed outside the normal flow of time. One by one, the alien invaders were being erased from existence, their bioships dissolving as reality rejected their presence." Hull. "Breach on Swarm Construct 7, reported Tactical Officer Tae-hyun, his weapons system still locked onto the retreating enemies. "Their central intelligence matrix is destabilizing. We could finish them now, sir. One more temporal strike and they'll be completely eliminated." Admiral Vextar's voice crackled across the communication channels from his damaged flagship. "Ghost Actual, our long-range sensors are detecting massive gravitational anomalies. The Centauri system's binary stars are beginning to destabilize. Whatever you're doing, it's affecting stellar mechanics across multiple sectors." The irony wasn't lost on Junseo. Humanity's greatest weapon was simultaneously their greatest curse. The Prometheus had been designed to fight enemies that conventional forces couldn't touch, using technologies that pushed the boundaries of what the universe would allow. But every exotic attack, every temporal manipulation, every dimensional phase was adding to a growing debt that reality would eventually demand payment for. "Captain," Chief Engineer Wu Jin called out from his station, "the dimensional phase generators are overheating. We're drawing too much power from the quantum foam. If we continue at this rate, we risk creating a permanent rift in space-time." Through the bridge's omnidirectional displays, Junseo watched as the consequences of their actions spread across local space. The space station Kepler's End, which they had fought so hard to protect, was experiencing time dilation effects that aged different sections at different rates. Emergency crews were trapped in temporal bubbles where minutes passed like hours, while other areas experienced time compression that made communication impossible. "Sir, priority transmission from Earth Command," Communications Officer Sojin announced, her face pale with concern. "They're detecting seismic activity across the solar system. The exotic energy we're releasing is affecting planetary gravitational fields." The message from Earth was brief but terrifying. The temporal waves generated by the Prometheus's exotic weapons were creating gravitational anomalies that threatened Earth's orbital stability. If the cascade continued to expand, it could destabilize the entire solar system, turning humanity's home into a chaotic maze of shifting gravity wells and temporal distortions. "How many swarm vessels remain?" Junseo asked, his enhanced mind calculating probabilities and consequences at superhuman speed. 17 primary constructs, sir," Tae-hyun replied. "They're retreating toward the galactic rim, but they're badly damaged. We could pursue and eliminate them completely." The tactical display showed the truth of their situation. The Void Swarm was beaten, their invasion force reduced to a handful of crippled bioships fleeing into dark space, but the cost of victory was becoming catastrophic. Each exotic weapon fired by the Prometheus added to the growing instability. Each temporal manipulation pushed reality closer to a breaking point that could shatter the galaxy itself. "Captain," Yujin called out urgently, "I'm detecting cascade resonance in the Vega system. Their primary star is beginning to fluctuate between different nuclear fusion states. If it goes supernova, The shockwave could destabilize a dozen neighboring systems. Junseo closed his enhanced eyes and felt the weight of command pressing down on him like a physical force. Through his neural implants, he could sense the Prometheus's eagerness to continue the fight. The ship's artificial intelligence, evolved from technologies that existed partially outside normal spacetime, was frustrated by the restraint its human crew was showing. The remaining swarm vessels were vulnerable, weakened by their encounters, with impossible physics. They could be eliminated completely, ensuring that their threat to galactic civilization was ended forever. But the cost would be the stability of local spacetime itself, potentially creating a zone of chaotic physics. That could expand indefinitely. "All stations, prepare for emergency phase-out," Junseo commanded, his voice carrying across the bridge with the authority of absolute decision. "We're pulling back." The bridge fell silent, except for the hum of exotic machinery and the distant groaning of reality under stress. "But, sir," Pilot Sojin protested, her enhanced reflexes still locked onto the fleeing swarm vessels, "we can finish them, complete the mission, end this threat once and for all." Junseo turned to face his crew, these enhanced humans who had volunteered to merge their consciousness with technologies that pushed the boundaries of sanity. They were the best humanity had to offer, but even they struggled to understand the full implications of what they were wielding. "At what cost?" Junseo's voice was heavy with the responsibility of command. "Some victories aren't worth winning. We came here to save the galaxy, not destroy it ourselves." He activated the ship's emergency protocols, beginning the complex process of powering down systems that existed partially outside normal physics. The temporal displacement drives wound down, collapsing the multiple timeline copies of the Prometheus back into a single vessel. The dimensional phase generators began their shutdown sequence, slowly returning the ship to normal space-time. "Sir, the swarm vessels are escaping," Tae-hyun reported, his frustration evident in his voice. "Let them go," Junseo replied. "They're wounded and broken. It will take them centuries to rebuild if they ever can, and maybe by then the galaxy will have learned to defend itself without weapons that threaten the fabric of existence." As the Prometheus began to fade back into dimensional storage, the exotic energies that had been tearing at reality's foundations began to dissipate. The temporal waves slowed their expansion, the gravitational anomalies stabilized, and space-time began the slow process of healing itself. The surviving void swarm vessels, those nightmare biomechanical constructs that had seemed invincible just hours before, limped toward the galactic rim. They were broken, damaged beyond easy repair, but they were alive. The threat to galactic civilization had been reduced from an extinction-level event to a manageable problem for future generations. Admiral Vexitar's final transmission to the Prometheus was filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Ghost. Actual, the galaxy owes you a debt we can never repay. But I hope we never have to see you again." Back on the lunar facility, Ambassador So Young stood before the reconvened Galactic Council. The chamber was packed with delegates from 47 species, all of them struggling to process what they had witnessed. The holographic displays showed the aftermath of the battle, space scarred by exotic physics, star systems still recovering from temporal distortions, and the humbling realization that humanity possessed weapons that could reshape reality itself. The Prometheus was our oldest ship, So Young said, her voice carrying across the chamber with quiet authority. "Built 3 centuries ago when we first realized we weren't alone in the universe. We've learned much since then about exotic physics, dimensional manipulation, and temporal warfare." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "Imagine what we've built since then." The chamber fell into stunned silence. Every delegate understood the message. Humanity had revealed just one weapon from their arsenal, and it had been enough to defeat an enemy that conventional forces couldn't touch. But that same weapon had nearly torn the galaxy apart in the process. The legend of the Prometheus would live on, passed down through generations of spacers and soldiers, but it would serve as more than just a tale of human ingenuity and determination. It would be a reminder that some powers were too dangerous to use, and that sometimes the greatest victory was knowing when to stop. In the depths of space, where the battle had been fought, reality slowly knitted itself back together. The scars would remain for millennia, zones where physics worked slightly differently, where time flowed at unusual rates, where the laws of the universe bore the permanent marks of humanity's intervention. And somewhere in the dark between galaxies, the remnants of the void swarm fled toward distant stars, carrying with them the knowledge that they had encountered something that defied their understanding of power and restraint. The galaxy was safe, but the price of that safety would be remembered. Forever. The end.